The rejection ceremony was supposed to break her. That was the whole point of it. Everyone in the Great Hall of Duskfen knew it. You didn't gather 300 wolves under torchlight for a quiet parting. You gathered them to watch a woman fall apart. And Isolde of Raymont stood at the center of that hall on a raised stone platform worn smooth by 100 years of feet, and she knew exactly what they had come to see. They wanted the crying, the clawing, the begging, because that was what rejected wolves did. When the mate bond tore something loose inside you and you screamed. You dropped to your knees. You reached for the man who no longer wanted you, and you begged him to reconsider because the pain was the kind of pain that made dignity feel like a luxury you couldn't afford. Isolde knew all of this. She had watched it happen once years ago to a girl named Cora who had been rejected in this very hall. Cora had wept until her voice gave out, and the pack had watched with something close to pleasure. So Isolde had had 18 years to decide she would not be Cora. 18 years. That was how long she had been promised to the man now standing 5 feet in front of her, his lip curled, his amber eyes bright with a contempt he'd been sharpening for most of his life. Aldous. He had been kind once. She remembered it the way you remember a smell from childhood, faint, unreliable, almost invented. They had been small, maybe 6 years old, and he'd taken her hand behind the kitchens and promised her they would rule the pack together someday. He'd meant it. She was almost sure he'd meant it. But children grow up, and boys learn what their fathers whisper to them at night. They learn what a half-blood is. They learn what a witch's daughter is. They learn the word abomination, and they learn to say it without flinching. Let the rejection be witnessed. That was her uncle's voice. Mordecai Vraimont Alpha of Duskfen, the man who had raised her after her mother's execution and reminded her every single day that she lived only because he permitted it. He said the words the way a man reads a grocery list. No cruelty in it. No warmth either, just administration. Aldous stepped forward, and Isolde breathed in through her nose slow the way she'd practiced. She squared her shoulders. She let her face go empty. I, Aldous, son of Beta Corin, reject you, Isolde of Raymont, as my mate and my future Luna. The bond began to tear. She had known it would hurt. She had not known it would feel like this. Like hooks. Like something with fingers reaching into her chest and pulling in the wrong direction, dragging against the grain of her own heartbeat. Every instinct in her body howled at her to stop it, to fight, to beg. She did not move. I reject you because you are unworthy. Aldous' voice climbed, warming to it now, playing to the crowd. Because your mother was a witch who betrayed our kind. Because your very blood is an insult to every pure-blood wolf in this hall. A murmur moved through the crowd. Agreement. Appetite. Isolde said nothing. But she was watching him. And this is what no one else in that hall was close enough to see. As Aldous said the cruel words, his eyes flicked just once, just for a heartbeat toward the back of the hall. Toward the shadows near the great doors. As though he were reading his lines from something written there. As though he were checking the way a frightened child checks a stern parent that he had said them right. She filed it away. She didn't know what it meant yet. But she filed it away because she had spent 18 years learning that the smallest movement in a person's face was the only truth they ever accidentally told you. Behind the empty face, behind the still hands, something in her had gone very quiet and very clear. Not calm. Clear. The way water goes clear when it stops moving. Because she had understood something in that moment, standing there with her chest being torn open in front of 300 people who wanted her to bleed. She understood that her pain belonged to her, and she would not give it away. Not to Aldous. Not to her uncle. Not to a single face in that crowd that had spat in her food and thrown stones at her back and called her thing since before she could walk. Well, Aldous demanded. She lifted her eyes to his. Don't you have anything to say? She let 3 full seconds pass. She watched him grow uncomfortable in the silence, watched the crowd shift. I accept your rejection. 4 words, no tears, no trembling, no sign at all that he had wounded her. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. It had weight. Because rejected wolves were supposed to shatter, and this one had not, and that frightened them in a way they couldn't name. Aldous looked almost offended. That's it. You're not going to beg. Would it change anything? His jaw worked. No. Then no. She held his gaze steady, unblinking. I won't beg. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman let out a breath that sounded like disappointment. They had come for a show. She was not going to give them one. Mordecai raised his hand for silence. The rejection is witnessed. Isolde of Raymont, you are hereby declared. Wait. The word came from the back of the hall. And it was not loud. That was the strange part. It was quiet, almost soft, a single syllable dropped into the room like a stone into still water. But every wolf in that hall went rigid at the sound of it because there are voices that ask and there are voices that command, and this was the second kind. Isolde watched the crowd part. They parted the way water parts before something moving beneath it. And through the opening walked a man she had never seen but had heard of in the way you hear of weather in a country you'll never visit. Alpha King Corwin Thal of Izmir. How was tall? That was her first coherent thought, and it embarrassed her because it was such a small thought for such a large moment. Taller than any wolf she had ever seen. Broad through the shoulders beneath a coat of black so deep it seemed to drink the torchlight rather than reflect it. His hair was dark, falling across a face carved from something colder than stone. Sharp cheekbones, a scar along the jaw thin and old. And his eyes. His eyes were the pale gray of ice over deep water. Cold, clear, and so tired that for 1/2 a second she forgot to be afraid of him and felt something closer to pity, which was, she would think later, the strangest possible reaction to the most powerful wolf in the 5 kingdoms. Your Majesty. Mordecai dropped into a bow so fast it looked like his knees had failed him. We did not expect you until tomorrow. Continue, Corwin said. He did not stop walking. He crossed the hall, and the crowd kept parting, and he came to the foot of the platform and stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the cold coming off him. Not the cold of a winter night. Something else. Something that came from inside him. You accepted the rejection, he said. It was not a question, but she answered it anyway. Yes, Your Majesty. Without begging. Yes. Why? And there it was. The question no one had ever bothered to ask her because no one had ever bothered to imagine she had reasons. Because begging wouldn't have changed the outcome, she said, and I refuse to give my pain to people who would enjoy it. Something moved behind those frozen eyes. She couldn't name it. She wasn't sure he could either. But it was there, a flicker gone almost before it arrived, like a match struck in a cave and shaken out. The silence stretched. Then Corwin turned to her uncle and said, I'm taking her. The hall came apart. Your Majesty. Mordecai's composure cracked straight down the middle. Surely you cannot be serious. She's a half-blood, a witch's daughter. She isn't fit to clean your floors, let alone. I don't recall asking your opinion. Corwin's voice did not rise. It never rose. She would learn that about him. It didn't need to. Isolde stood frozen, her mind scrambling to catch up with a moment that had gotten away from her. The Alpha King was claiming her. This had to be a mistake. This was the kind of thing that only happened to other people in other stories, and she had never once in her life been the girl things happened to. This must be a mistake, she heard herself say. Corwin turned those winter eyes back to her. Do I look like a man who makes mistakes? He did not. He looked like a man who counted his own breaths for accuracy. No, Your Majesty. Then we understand each other. He turned back to Mordecai. The half-blood leaves with me tonight. Consider Duskfin's debts to the crown forgiven in exchange. And she watched it happen. She watched the exact moment her uncle's outrage turned to arithmetic. Whatever Duskfin owed the crown, it was enough. Enough to buy her. Enough to make a proud man swallow his pride whole and smile while he did it. Very well, Mordecai said slowly. If Your Majesty wishes to collect her, we won't stand in your way. Collect, as if she were a debt, a parcel, a thing left too long on a shelf. Come, Corwin said to her, not a request. And so she came. She stepped down off the platform and followed him through the parting crowd. And as she passed Aldous close enough to touch, she looked at him, and he looked back at her. And there it was again, that flicker of something behind his eyes. Something that was not contempt at all. Something that looked, she thought, almost exactly like shame. His lips parted, as though he might say something, as though there were words behind his teeth he had been ordered to keep there. I didn't say them. He looked at the back of the hall again, at the shadows, and his mouth closed, and he stepped aside to let her pass. And the whispers trailed after her like smoke. He'll tire of her in a week. She'll be dead within a month. Poor thing. Doesn't even know what he'll do to her. She kept her chin up. She kept her eyes forward. Because she had learned a long time ago that the only thing worse than being watched was letting them see it land. But here is what none of them saw. As she crossed the threshold of the great hall, the very threshold she had crossed 10,000 times in 18 years of being nobody, something flickered to life in the palm of her right hand. A small flame, gold, warm, gone before she could even look down at it. And she told herself she had imagined it. She was very good at telling herself things. The courtyard was cold and black, and a carriage waited in it, a carriage drawn by horses whose eyes caught the torchlight and threw it back red. Corwin paused at the door. He looked at her and his gaze dropped, and she followed it and understood. Her hands were shaking, fine tremors running through her fingers, betraying everything the empty face had worked so hard to hide. She hadn't even felt them start. "You're shaking," he said. "I apologize, Your Majesty." "Don't." A pause. "Get in." The inside of the carriage was warmer than she expected. Dark velvet lining the walls. A small brazier burning low in one corner, throwing amber light across the seats. She sat and he sat across from her, and the door closed, and the carriage lurched into motion. And just like that, 18 years of her life fell away behind her into the dark. They were alone. For a long while neither of them spoke. The wheels turned, the horses ran. The torchlit walls of Duskfen slid past the window, and then there was only night. "Why?" she said finally. He looked out the window. "Why what?" "You could have anyone. Princesses, daughters of lords, women who would kill to sit where I'm sitting." She looked down at her own hands. "I'm worth nothing. Everyone in that hall would have told you so." "They'd have been wrong," she almost laughed. "You don't even know me." "No," he agreed. "But I know that a woman who can stand in front of 300 people who despise her and refuse to give them her tears is not worth nothing." He turned from the window and looked at her, and the ice in his eyes had a strange steadiness to it. "You're worth something to me. You'll understand why when we reach Izmir." "Are you going to hurt me?" Surprise crossed his face, genuine surprise and something almost like offense underneath it. "No." "Then what do you want from me?" "I want you to serve a purpose." He said it plainly without cruelty. "In exchange you'll have protection and comfort, status, everything Duskfen denied you. And if I refuse, you won't." It wasn't arrogance. That was the odd thing. It was simply certainty, the kind that came from having read her correctly the first time. "Because you're a survivor," he said, "and survivors don't refuse the chance to live." And she hated that he was right. She hated it in the deep, quiet place where her honesty lived. Because she was a survivor, and she had been one for 18 years, and survival had never once been beautiful or brave. It had just been the thing she did instead of dying. "Fine," she whispered. "I'll hear your offer when we reach Izmir." "Good." He leaned his head back against the velvet and closed his eyes. "Sleep. It's a long journey. She should have stayed awake." Every instinct she owned told her to stay awake, to watch this strange cold man, to be ready. But exhaustion has a gravity of its own, and she was so tired, 18 years tired. And beneath the fear, beneath everything, there was something she had not felt in longer than she could remember, something she could not have named if her life depended on it. She felt safe, which made no sense at all. Her eyes drifted closed, and she did not see the way he opened his once she'd gone still. She did not see the way he watched her sleep, the exhaustion in his own face deepening into something that might have been grief or hope, or the terrible place where those two things meet. She did not hear him when he spoke, so quietly that even a wolf's ears might have missed it. "Finally." The journey took 3 days. She would remember it later in pieces. The rocking of the carriage, the gray light of morning through frost-webbed glass. The way he had food brought to her at every stop and watched without comment to make sure she ate it, because she would understand this. Only later, he had noticed how thin she was, and it bothered him in a way he didn't examine. They didn't speak much. He wasn't a man built for conversation. But the silences were not unkind, and she found that surprising, and she found herself thinking about it, and then catching herself thinking about it, and then telling herself to stop. On the third day, the carriage crested a ridge, and she saw Izmir for the first time. The castle rose out of the mountains like a crown of black stone and silver ice. Its towers pierced the low clouds and vanished into them, their peaks lost somewhere in the perpetual mist that hung over the range. Even from this distance, even through the glass, she could feel the cold radiating off it. A cold that had nothing to do with altitude and everything to do with whatever lived inside those walls. "That's where you live," she said. "That's where I exist," he said. "It's not the same thing." And she didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. By the time they reached the gates, her nerves were wound so tight she thought they might snap and take her spine with them. Guards in silver and black, corridors of dark stone. A silence in that castle that was not the silence of an empty place, but the silence of a place holding its breath. She was led to chambers larger than any room she had ever occupied. A bed draped in white furs, a fireplace tall enough to stand inside, windows that looked out over frozen mountains, and a sky the color of pewter. "The king will send for you this evening," a servant said, a young woman dark-haired with sharp, watchful eyes that missed nothing. "Clothing has been provided." The servant turned to go. "What's your name?" Isolde asked. Because in 18 years, no one had ever bothered to give her theirs, and she had decided somewhere on that 3-day road that she was done living like a person things happened to. The servant paused, looked back. Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, that the half-blood had asked. "Bryn, my lady." "I'm not a lady." "You are here," Bryn said, and left. The summons came at dusk. She followed a guard through the maze of the castle down corridors that all looked the same past windows full of failing light until they reached a door of black wood, and the guard knocked, and a voice inside said, "Enter," and she went in. It was a study. Books on every wall, floor to ceiling, more books than she had known existed in the world. A fire in the hearth. And standing at the window with his back to her looking out at the dark mountains was Corwin. "Sit," he said without turning. She sat. He was quiet for a long moment. And then he began to speak, still facing the window, as if the words were easier to say to the glass than to her face. "12 years ago, I took the throne after my father died. And I inherited something along with it. Not a crown, a curse." She kept very still. 300 years ago, a witch laid a curse on the royal bloodline of Izmir. The curse is simple, which is what makes it terrible. Every king of Izmir slowly loses his wolf, his warmth, his ability to feel anything at all. We turn cold, literally, figuratively. My father was a frozen shell of a man by the time he died, and he did not weep at his own father's funeral, because by then he had forgotten how. He turned from the window, and in the firelight she saw it. The exhaustion carved into every line of his face, the gray of a man being emptied out from the inside. "I'm halfway there already," he said. He lifted his hand, and in the warm light of that fire, frost bloomed across his skin. Crystals of it spreading over his knuckles, up his fingers glittering, and then slowly receding, melting back into nothing. She stared. She couldn't help it. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because there's one way to break it." He lowered his hand. "The king must find his true mate, not a wife, not a match of convenience, his actual fated mate, chosen by the goddess herself. And for 12 years I have searched for her. I have met every eligible wolf in 5 kingdoms. Princesses, warriors, beauties who were paraded in front of me like horses at a fair." His voice was flat, drained of everything. "I felt nothing. Not once. Not a flicker." He looked at her. "Until 3 nights ago." Her breath caught. She didn't mean for it to. When you accepted your rejection without begging, he said, my wolf woke up, not all the way, but enough. Enough to lift its head for the first time in 12 years and recognize something across a crowded hall. I'm a half-blood, she said, and she heard how thin her voice had gone. A witch's daughter. I can't be, I'm not the goddess doesn't choose people like me. People like me are what the goddess made to warn everyone else. I don't know what you are, he said, but my wolf knows something, and I intend to find out what. He came around the desk, slowly, and he stopped in front of her, and he looked down at her with those tired, frozen eyes, and he made his offer. Stay in Wisemere, let me learn whether you're my true mate. In exchange, you'll be protected, provided for, treated as an honored guest whatever the court says about your blood. And if I am wrong, if you are not my mate, then you'll leave with enough gold to live comfortably for the rest of your life. Free, beholden to no one, never again a thing that anyone can collect. And if you're right, she asked, if I am your mate, and something moved in his eyes then, something buried so deep beneath the ice that she almost missed it. But she didn't miss it because she had spent 18 years learning to read the smallest movements in the faces of people who wished her harm, and this was not that. This was hope, old hope, half frozen, but alive. Then you'll save my life, he said, and I will spend the rest of mine making certain you never regret it. She looked at him. At this cursed man, this cold king turning slowly to ice from the inside out, who had watched a nobody except her own destruction, with her chin up, and had felt his dying wolf stir for the first time in over a decade. I agree to your terms, she said. He exhaled. She saw it leave him the breath, saw some fraction of the tension go with it. Good, we begin tomorrow. He turned back to the window, and she understood she was dismissed, and she rose and she went to the door. One more thing. She stopped, her hand on the latch. I am incapable of love. He said it to the glass, to the dark, not to her. The curse took that from me years ago. I don't feel it. I can't. So whatever happens between us in the days to come, however this goes, do not expect me to feel anything for you. It would only be cruel to let you hope for something I no longer have to give. A long silence. I understand, Your Majesty, she said, and she opened the door and stepped through it. And she did not see, neither of them saw the small flame that flickered to life in the palm of her hand the very instant she crossed the threshold. Gold, steady, warmer than the fire in his hearth, a flame that had slept for 18 years and had just very quietly woken up. She did not sleep well that first night. She lay in the enormous bed under the white furs and stared up at a ceiling she couldn't see and thought about frost blooming across a king's hand, thought about the word mate, thought about the way her uncle's face had turned to arithmetic, thought against her own better judgment about a voice so quiet she'd half convinced herself she'd dreamed it, finally. And when she finally did sleep, she dreamed of fire. Not fire that burned, fire that warmed, fire that had a shape almost that seemed to be trying to tell her something in a language she'd forgotten before she was born. She woke with her heart pounding and the taste of smoke in her mouth and the sheets around her strangely warm. She told herself it was nothing. She was getting very good at telling herself that. The great hall of Wisemere by daylight was a thing of terrible beauty. Polished obsidian floors that threw back the light, silver filigree crawling up the columns like frozen vines, chandeliers of pure crystal scattering the pale morning sun into 1,000 cold fragments across a floor filled with wolves in their finest clothes. Every one of them was staring at her. Lady Isolde. A servant appeared at her elbow. Not Bryn, a man this time. The king requests you join him at the high table. The whispers began before she had taken 3 steps. That's her. The half-blood from Duskfen. What is His Majesty thinking, bringing witch spawn into the court? She won't last the season, mark me. The high table sat on a raised dais at the head of the hall. Corwin occupied the center seat, and even seated he seemed carved from a colder material than everyone around him. To his left, an empty chair. To his right, a broad-shouldered lord with iron-gray hair and a face like a fist that had never once unclenched. Lord Castellan, murmured the servant low for her ears only. "The king's chief adviser. He has opposed your presence from the moment word of it reached the castle. Be careful of that one, my lady." She reached the dais. She curtsied because no one had ever taught her, and she felt the whole hall register the badness of it. "Sit," Corwin said. She lowered herself into the empty chair, and Lord Castellan's gaze came across her like a blade laid flat against her throat. "So," he said it loudly. He wanted the hall to hear. "This is the creature you've brought into our midst. For 12 years you have turned away every suitable match in 5 kingdoms. Princesses sent home weeping, alliances left to rot, and now—" He let the pause do its work. "Now you present us with a half-blood nobody, a witch's whelp from a border pack that can't even pay its debts." "Your concern is noted," Corwin said. He did not look up from his plate. "And irrelevant. Your Majesty." "Lord Castellan." The temperature at the table dropped. She felt it on her skin, an actual physical drop, and she watched frost crystallize along the silver rim of the king's plate, delicate and sudden as breath on a window. "You forget yourself," Corwin said. The advisor's face went pale, then paler. "Lady Isolde is here at my invitation," the king went on, and though his voice never rose, it filled the hall to its farthest corners. "She will be treated with the respect due any honored guest of this crown, and anyone who fails to extend her that courtesy." His gray eyes lifted at last and swept the hall, and it seemed to Isolde that every wolf in it flinched at once. "Will answer to me, personally." Silence. And then one by one heads began to lower. Not out of respect, she knew the difference, out of fear, but she had lived her whole life without even that much, and she found to her own quiet shame that fear on her behalf felt almost like being protected. Lord Castellan sat back. His fury was a live thing barely leashed, and when his eyes found hers again, there was a promise in them. Under the table where no one could see, her hands were shaking again. "You're not eating," Corwin said, quietly, for her alone. "I'm not hungry, Your Majesty." "You need to eat. You're too thin. Whatever they fed you in Duskfen, it wasn't enough." And she looked at him, this cold, distant, dying king, who had in the middle of a court full of enemies, in the middle of a war he was losing against his own blood, noticed that she was underfed. "I wasn't a priority there," she said, very low. "You are here." 3 words. And she had survived stones and slurs and 18 years of being nobody's priority, and it was 3 quiet words at a breakfast table that finally nearly undid her. She had to look down at her plate. She had to blink twice hard. "Why do you care?" she asked when she could trust her voice again. His jaw tightened. He looked away out over the hall at all those bowed and frightened heads. "I don't know," he said, "and that troubles me more than you could possibly imagine." That was how it began. Not with fire, though fire would come. Not with the breaking of curses, or the falling of kingdoms, though those would come too. It began with a woman who would not beg, and a king who could not feel, and 3 quiet words spoken over a cold breakfast in a colder hall. "You are here." Isolde of Raymont did not know that first morning at the high table of Izmir that she carried inside her the answer to a 300-year-old question. She did not know that the flame waking in her palm had a name and a history and a purpose older than the castle around her. She did not know that the mother she had lost was innocent of every crime they'd hung on her, or that the man who had arranged that loss was sitting close enough to touch, watching her with a fist for a face. She knew only this: that for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and seen a person worth feeding, worth protecting, worth wondering about. And she had spent so long being nobody that she had forgotten what it did to a person. To be seen. It was, she would think much later, the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to her. Because you could survive being nobody. She had proof of that. 18 years of proof. But once someone sees you, once someone looks across a crowded hall and stops and turns and chooses you, you can never go back to being invisible again. And she was not at all sure that first cold morning in Izmir that she was strong enough to survive being seen. She was about to find out, because the frost on the king's plate had not melted, And somewhere far below the castle, in a place no one had opened in 300 years, something old and patient and bound in silence felt the flame wake in her palm. And it began very slowly to smile. The days that followed settled into a strange and fragile rhythm. Each morning a guard would come to Isolde's door and lead her through the maze of black corridors to the king's study. And each morning she would sit in the chair across from his desk, and Corwin would take her hand in both of his, and they would wait. That was the whole of it, the waiting. He held her hand, and his fingers were cold, colder than a living man's fingers had any right to be, and they both watched the place where their skin met, as though something might rise from it. A spark, a recognition, some sign that the goddess had against all sense written this half-blood's name beside a king's. Nothing came. No jolt, no warmth, no mate bond snapping into place like the closing of a door. And every morning she would feel the disappointment settle over the room like frost on glass. And every morning he would let go of her hand and say in that flat, drained voice, "Tomorrow," and she would rise and go, and neither of them would say what they were both thinking, which was that they were running out of tomorrows, because she could see it now. The curse. Once she knew to look, she couldn't stop looking. The way frost gathered at the rim of his cup while he drank. The way his breath fogged in a room where hers didn't. The way some mornings he would flex his hand before he took hers, working the stiffness out of fingers that were slowly forgetting how to be warm. He was dying. Slowly. In plain sight. And the whole castle was pretending not to watch. "You're frustrated," she said on the 5th morning. "I'm patient." "You're lying." His eyebrows rose, just slightly, and she felt a small bright flare of alarm at her own boldness. "Because you did not call the Alpha King of Izmir a liar to his face, not if you wanted to keep the face you said it with." But she had spent 18 years swallowing everything and something about this cold study, this failing man, this impossible arrangement had loosened the thread that held her tongue. "Most people," Corwin said slowly, "are afraid to call me a liar. My fear reserves are depleted," she said. "I use them all up in Duskfen. There's nothing left for you." And for one impossible moment she would swear to it later. She would turn it over in her mind 100 times. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. She wouldn't insult it by calling it a smile. But something in that direction. A thing his face remembered how to do and had not done in a long, long time. Then it was gone, and he let go of her hand, and he said, "Tomorrow." But she carried that almost smile back to her chambers like a coal cupped in her palms. The court did not warm to her. Of course it didn't. She hadn't expected it to. She had lived her whole life among people who despised her, and she had a scholar's understanding of contempt, all its shapes and flavors. She knew the sneer. She knew the whisper that cut off the moment she entered a room. She knew the particular cruelty of a bow given so shallowly it was really an insult wearing the clothes of respect. Izmir gave her all of it, and at the center of it always was Lord Castellan. He never raised his voice to her. He was far too clever for that. He wielded courtesy like a knife, all smooth edges and hidden points. "Lady Isolde," he would say, and make the title sound like a joke only he was in on. "How good of you to grace us. We were just discussing the old prophecies. You'd know something of witches' work, I imagine. It's in the blood, isn't it? Witchcraft. The way some families have a talent for music." And the court would laugh softly behind their hands. She learned to say nothing. She learned to let it slide off her the way she'd learned in Duskfen. But it was harder here. Because in Duskfen she'd had nothing to lose, and here she was beginning to suspect with a kind of dread. Here she had something. And something was so much more frightening to hold than nothing. Bryn was the one who told her the rest. Bryn, who came each evening to help her dress and undress, and who had somewhere in those first weeks stopped being a servant and started being something Isolde had never had before. A friend. The word felt foreign in her mouth. She kept taking it out and looking at it. "He's been here longer than the king," Bryn said one night, brushing out Isolde's hair by the fire. "Castellan. He was chief advisor to the old king too, and his father before that was advisor to the king before him." "A family business," Isolde said. "A family business." Bryn's brush paused. "My grandmother served in this castle. She used to say the Castellans have had their hands around the throat of this throne for longer than anyone can remember. that the kings freeze and the castellans rule. She caught herself, glanced at the door, lowered her voice. I shouldn't say such things. You can say them to me, Isolde said. I'm nobody. Words are safe with nobody. Bryn met her eyes in the mirror. You're not nobody, she said. Not anymore. And I think that's exactly what frightens him. The garden was Isolde's idea, though she never meant it to be. It happened by accident. She'd been wandering the castle grounds one gray afternoon. She was allowed to wander now within limits. Another small, strange freedom. She kept turning over in disbelief, and she'd come upon a walled garden behind the eastern wing. Except it wasn't a garden anymore. It was a graveyard of one. Black stems, frozen soil. A fountain locked solid in mid-fall. The water turned to glass 100 years ago and never thawed. Everything in it dead and not dead, the way winter kills things dead, the way the curse killed things. Frozen. Held. Suspended in a cold that never broke and never would. She stood at the center of it and felt absurdly that she understood it. Because she knew what it was to be frozen in place. To be held. To be a thing the world had decided was finished and simply hadn't bothered to bury. And she knelt down in that dead soil without deciding to, and she pressed her palm flat against the frozen ground. She didn't mean anything by it. That was what she'd tell herself afterward. She wasn't trying to do anything. She just felt sorry for it, this poor, dead, frozen place, and she wanted to touch it, the way you touch the hand of someone dying, not to heal them, but just so they aren't alone at the end. And her palm grew warm. She felt it start. A heat blooming up from somewhere beneath her ribs, running down her arm, gathering in her hand. And under her palm the frozen soil began to steam, to soften, to thaw. She snatched her hand back like she'd been burned, but it was too late, because where her hand had been a single green shoot was pushing up through the black soil, uncurling, reaching, alive. She stared at it. Her heart slammed against her ribs, and a voice in her head, her own voice high and scared, was saying, "No, no, no, put it back, hide it. This is the thing that got your mother killed. This is the thing they'll burn you for. Put it back. Except you cannot put a thing like that back." So she did the only thing she could think of. She stood up and she brushed the soil from her knees and she walked out of that garden and she told no one. And she did not see the green shoot behind her quietly grow. They found the garden a week later. Not her doing. She'd stayed away terrified. But the thaw, once it started, hadn't stopped. It had spread. It had crept root by root across the dead soil, and by the time a gardener stumbled onto it, the whole eastern garden was green, impossibly miraculously green, soft grass and unfurling leaves, and in the center the fountain running clear and free for the first time in 100 years. The castle didn't know what to make of it. Some said it was an omen. Some said it was the king's own power returning. Some, and these were the ones Castellan whispered to, said it was witchcraft, and looked at Isolde when they said it. But the people, the ordinary people, the servants and the guards and the children of the castle, who'd never in their lives seen a living garden inside these walls, they loved it. She watched them from a window that first day the garden was found. Watched a small girl reach out and touch a green leaf with one finger, wonderingly the way you'd touch something holy. Watched an old woman sit down on the thawed grass and put her face in her hands and weep. And she understood something then that she didn't have words for yet. That the cold in Wisemere was not just the king's cold. It had seeped into everything, into the walls and the people and the very idea of the place. These people had been living in winter their whole lives, and they hadn't known there was anything else. And now here was one square of green, telling them there had always been. She never told anyone it was her. But Corwin knew. I didn't say so, not at first. But she caught him looking at her differently after that, as though she were a book he'd assumed he'd finished and had just discovered had chapters he'd never read. "You did that," he said finally. They were in his study. Evening. The testing done for the day, her hand cold in her lap where his had let it go. "Did what?" she said. "The garden." She said nothing, which was of course an answer. "How long have you known," he asked, quietly, "that you could do that?" "I didn't," she whispered. "I don't. I've never my whole life, I never my mother, And she stopped, because her voice had gone somewhere she couldn't follow, and she had to breathe before she could go on. They killed my mother for having what I just felt in my hands. And I've spent 18 years praying I didn't have it too. And now I do. And I don't know what to do with that. He was quiet for a long moment. Tell me about her, he said. Your mother. And so she did. She told him things she had never told a living soul. She told him about the execution she'd witnessed when she was 3 years old, 3 too young to understand, old enough to never forget. She told him about her uncle's cold charity, the roof over her head, that he'd reminded her daily she didn't deserve. She told him about the servants who'd spat in her food, and the children who'd thrown stones, and how one of those children had been her own cousin Vespera Mordecai's daughter, who used to lead the others because leading them made the adults smile at her. She told him about a lifetime of being tolerated, and never once, not once, being wanted. And when she finished, Corwin's face had gone somewhere very far away, and very cold. Not curse cold, a different cold. The cold of a man doing arithmetic he did not like the sum of. If I had known, he said at last, very low, what they did to you, in that place. He looked at her. I would have burned Duskfen to the ground and salted the earth it stood on. And she believed him. That was the frightening part. She believed him completely. That night he did not send her back to her chambers. Dine with me, he said, not a command. She'd learned to hear the difference now, and this was not one. It was almost she hardly dared think it was almost shy. They ate in his private quarters, the fire throwing long shadows up the walls, and they talked. Not about curses, not about mates, about small things. The books on his walls. A war he'd fought at 19 and still dreamed about. The way she'd taught herself to read in secret in Duskfen by candle stubs stolen from the chapel because her uncle had said a witch's daughter had no business with letters. You taught yourself, he said. There wasn't anyone to teach me. He looked at her across the firelight, and something crossed his face that she couldn't name. No, he said, I don't suppose there was. And she noticed then that the frost had come while they talked. It had crept across his goblet up the stem, blooming over the metal in delicate white lace. He hadn't noticed. Or he had, and had stopped letting himself care. You're colder tonight, she said. I can see it, on the glass. He looked at the frost as though it belonged to someone else. The curse moves faster in winter, he said, and winter is coming. And if we don't break it before then, he didn't answer, which was its own answer. And she did the thing she'd been not doing for weeks. She reached across the small table and took his cold hand in both of hers, and she began gently to rub warmth into it. The way you'd warm a child's hands come in from the snow. He went very still. What are you doing? He said. His voice had gone rough. Trying to warm you. No one touches me willingly. He said it like a fact he'd made peace with a long time ago. Not like this, not for no reason. Everyone deserves gentleness, she said. And she felt it then, under her hands, beneath the cold, the smallest thread of warmth struggling, flickering like a candle in a wind. Not much, but there, alive. Something moved in his face, a crack in the ice of it. And when he spoke again, his voice was lower than she'd ever heard it. I've done terrible things, he said. Ordered men to their deaths. Led wars that widowed half a kingdom. I am not a good man, Isolde. Whatever you've decided about me these last weeks, don't decide that. Monsters don't fight this hard to stay human, she said. And his eyes came up to hers, and there was something burning in them, something the curse had not yet reached. Why do you keep trying to save me, he said, when I have told you plainly that I can give you nothing in return? And she almost said it. Because I'm falling in love with you. The words were right there, right behind her teeth. And they terrified her because they were true, and because she had never once in her life said a true thing about her own heart out loud, because true things about her heart had never been safe. So she said the other true thing instead, the safer one, the one she could survive saying. Because you're the first person, she said, who ever thought I was worth saving. Corwin closed his eyes, and then slowly, so slowly as though he were afraid she might vanish if he moved too fast. He lifted her hands and he pressed his lips to her palm. The kiss was cold as the heart of winter. But beneath the cold, faint and desperate and refusing to die, she felt the warmth of a man fighting to stay alive. "Stay tonight," he whispered against her skin. "Not for the testing, not for politics, not for any reason but that I don't want you to go." A breath. "Just stay." "Yes," she said. She woke in the dead of night to find him shaking. Not shivering, shaking. His whole body convulsing under the fur's ice crystals forming on his eyelashes, his lips gone gray-blue in the dark. And the room was cold, so cold, her own breath fogging in front of her face. The fire in the hearth burning low and blue and giving no heat at all. "Corwin." She pulled him toward her, wrapped herself around him, pressed her warmth against his freezing skin. "Corwin, hold on to me. I'm here. Hold on." His arms came around her convulsively, like a drowning man finding wood. "It's accelerating," he gasped. His teeth chattered so hard she could barely make out the words. "Something's changed. It's never moved this fast. Something's changed, and I don't—" "What could change it? Tell me what could change it." And he was quiet for a moment, shaking against her, and then he said something that broke her heart clean in two. "Hope." She went still. "The curse feeds on despair," he said into her shoulder, into the dark. "That's how it works. That's how it always worked. My father, he stopped hoping, and it took him fast at the end because a man with no hope is easy to freeze." A shudder ran through him. "But hope. Hope makes it fight harder. Because hope is the one thing it can't stand, and I—" He stopped. "You started hoping," she whispered. "Because of me." "For the first time in 12 years," he said, "I lay down at night and thought maybe I don't have to die alone in this cold. Maybe there's a way out. Maybe she's the way out." His arms tightened. "And the curse felt it. And now it's trying to kill the hope before the hope can kill it." She held him tighter. She didn't know what else to do. "What do we do?" she said. "I don't know." His voice was fading. Frost climbed his throat. "But whatever you are, Isolde, whatever's in you when you touch me, the cold pulls back. You're the only thing that's kept me alive these last weeks. Do you understand? Not the scholars, not the testing. You. Just you." He pressed his forehead to hers, and his skin was so cold it burned. "I told you I couldn't love you," he said. "I believed it. I've believed it for 12 years because believing it was the only thing that made the cold bearable." A ragged breath. "But lying here, feeling you against me, your warmth—" He shuddered. "I think I've been falling since the moment you refused to beg, and I think that's what's killing me. And I don't care. I don't care anymore. If loving you is what freezes me, then let me freeze warm for once, instead of cold and alone like every king before me." Her eyes blurred. "Don't," he said suddenly, urgently, feeling the wet on her face. "Don't say it back, please. Whatever you feel, don't say it. The curse takes everything I let myself care about. If we say it out loud, if we name it, it might come for you too. And I would rather freeze 1,000 years than let it touch you." So she didn't say it. She kissed him instead. Soft, gentle. A question, not an answer. And beneath her lips, his mouth warmed. His hands came up into her hair, and deep in her chest, in the place her mother had hidden something, 18 years ago. Fire ignited, real fire, warm and gold and rising, and when they finally broke apart, Corwin was staring at her with something like awe. "Your eyes," he breathed. "Isolde, your eyes are glowing." She lifted a hand to her own face. Her skin was feverish, hot to the touch. "What's happening to me?" she whispered. But somewhere deep inside, in a place older than her fear, she already knew. The witch blood was awake, and nothing in this world or any other was going to put it back to sleep. The next morning he looked almost well, color in his face, warmth in his hands. He caught her looking, and something in his expression gentled. "Whatever you did last night," he said, "it helped. I haven't felt this myself in years." And she opened her mouth to answer, and a fist hammered on the door. "Your Majesty!" A guard's voice tight with alarm. "Forgive the intrusion. Envoys have arrived at the gate. From Duskfen." A pause. "They're demanding the return of Lady Isolde. And Your Majesty, they've brought a writ from the Council of Territories. The warmth drained from Corwin's face, and frost thin and sudden crackled across his knuckles. "Are they?" he said, very softly. She hadn't seen her uncle in weeks. She'd hoped never to see him again. But there he was in the council chamber, flanked by guards wearing the smile he wore when he wanted something. Mordecai Vraimont, and beside him, stiff and pale, avoiding her eyes, Aldous. "My dear niece." Mordecai spread his hands. "We've been so worried." "She is home," Corwin said. "Your Majesty, surely you understand the position you've put us in." Mordecai's voice was silk over steel. "To keep a half-blood at your side witch spawn when the very curse afflicting your bloodline was laid by a witch. The Council has questions. The Council has concerns. And frankly, so do the other packs. It has the look of a king who's been, how shall I put this, bewitched." "The Council answers to me," Corwin said. Ice began to spread across the stone floor, creeping toward Mordecai's boots. "Not the other way around." "For now," said a smooth voice from the head of the table. Lord Castellan. He'd been there the whole time, she realized, sitting quietly, waiting. And now he rose unhurried and folded his hands and looked at her with the patient satisfaction of a man watching a plan he'd set in motion a very long time ago finally arrive at its destination. "The girl has enchanted our king," Castellan said to the room. "It's plain to anyone with eyes. He turns away princesses for 12 years, and then a witch's daughter accepts a rejection without weeping, and suddenly he cannot be parted from her. This is not love, my lords. This is sorcery. And I, for one, will not stand by while the Izmir throne is claimed by the very bloodline that cursed it." And Isolde felt the floor drop out of her stomach, because she saw all at once how it fit together. Aldous, pale, miserable Aldous, who wouldn't meet her eyes. Aldous, who had been kind once, who had held her hand and promised her the world. Aldous, who had rejected her with a cruelty so sudden and so total that it had never quite made sense. Aldous, who had looked to the shadows at the back of the hall for permission before he spoke. She looked at him now, and he looked back. And for one terrible instant his face broke open and she saw it. The shame, the fear, the thing he'd been carrying, and she understood the way you understand the answer to a riddle, a half-second before it's spoken, that Aldous had not rejected her because he hated her. He'd rejected her because someone had made him. "Aldous," she said, softly, across the whole chamber. "Who told you to do it?" His mouth opened, and Castellan said smoothly, quickly, "The boy has nothing to say to you, witch." And Aldous's mouth closed and his eyes dropped to the floor, and the moment passed. But she had seen it, and Corwin beside her had seen her see it. "My mate," Corwin said. The words fell into the chamber like a stone into a frozen lake. The whole room went silent. Mordecai's smile froze. Castellan's patient face flickered. "My mate," Corwin said again, rising, and this time there was iron in it, and something older than iron underneath. "The one the goddess chose for me. And I will burn every territory from here to the eastern sea before I let any of you take her from me." And the moment he said it, the moment those words left his mouth and hung in the cold air of that chamber, Isolde felt something snap into place inside her chest. The bond. It hit her like lightning. His cold, his fear, his exhaustion, his desperate and forbidden love, all of it came flooding through her at once, a torrent more than she could hold. And her warmth poured back into him, gold and rising, meeting his cold like fire meeting ice. Corwin gasped, staggered, caught the edge of the table. "What?" he breathed. "What is—" "The bond," she whispered. Her eyes were glowing again. She could feel it, the heat rising off her skin. "It's real. It was always real. But the curse had felt it too. And the curse was not going to surrender its king without a fight. Frost exploded across Corwin's skin. Not the slow creep of these last weeks, a violent roaring bloom of it, sheeting up his arms, crawling toward his face, his throat, his eyes. "No," he choked. He grabbed her hands. "Not now. Not when I finally—" "Corwin, stay with me. Fight it. Isolde, stay. I can't stop it. I don't know how. The curse knows," he gasped, and the frost reached his jaw, and his voice was failing, going thin and cold and far away. "It knows I love you. It's killing me for it. And he had finally said it. The word he'd forbidden. Love. He'd said it in a room full of his enemies, said it, while the curse closed its fist around his heart, said it because it was true, and because he was dying, and because a man will finally tell the truth when he has run out of tomorrows to hide it in. Tell me how to stop it, she begged. Corwin, tell me how. Find the witch, he breathed. Barely a sound now. Who cast it? Her bloodline. My scholars found records a descendant lives somewhere in. His voice gave out. His eyes rolled back. And the Alpha King of Izmir, the coldest ruler their kind had ever known. The man who had told her he could not love, and had died proving that he could collapsed at her feet in a sheet of white frost. Corwin. And deep inside her the fire roared to life. The world narrowed to a single point, to him dying on the cold stone, to the curse consuming him, to the bond brand new and already screaming, as it felt the other half of itself begin to slip away into the dark. She dropped to her knees. She pressed both hands flat against his chest over his frozen, failing heart, and she pushed. Not with her body, deeper than that. She pushed with the fire, with the witch blood, with 18 years of buried power. Finally fully awake. Heat exploded from her palms and the frost on his skin sizzled and steam rose hissing into the cold air, and the ice retreated just slightly, just enough to buy them a breath. Not enough to save him. Lady Isolde, a hand on her shoulder. Bryn. Bryn had pushed through the chaos, her face white, her eyes wild with something that was half terror and half resolve. My lady, listen to me. There's no time. I have to tell you something. About the curse. And about your mother. Isolde looked up at her hands still pressed to a dying king's chest. Fire still pouring out of her, the whole world burning down around them. Tell me, she said. Everything. Now. Your mother was innocent. Bryn said it fast, low, close to Isolde's ear, the words tumbling out like she'd been holding them for years and the dam had finally broken. And maybe she had. Maybe she had. She didn't betray the pack. She didn't kill anyone. Everything they told you, everything they killed her for, it was a lie built to bury a bigger one. Isolde's hand stayed pressed to Corwin's chest. The fire kept pouring. The frost kept fighting it. And the whole council chamber had gone silent around them, every wolf frozen in place, because a king was dying on the floor, and a half-blood was burning like a torch, and no one in that room knew what to do with either of those things. Then tell me the truth, Isolde said. The bigger one, now. Bryn swallowed. The curse wasn't laid by some random witch 300 years ago, she said. That's the story they tell. It's not the truth. The witch who cursed this bloodline, she wasn't a stranger to it. Bryn's eyes searched hers, pleading, terrified. My lady, she was yours. Her name was Ravenna Vraimont. She was your ancestor. The fire in Isolde's hands guttered. What? She whispered. 300 years ago, the first king of Izmir loved a witch. Bryn said, the words coming faster now. Ravenna, he promised to make her his queen. He meant it, or she believed he meant it, and she gave him everything. And then she got with child. And when she did, he cast her aside. Married a pureblood wolf princess for the alliance. Left Ravenna to raise his child alone and disgraced a witch with a bastard in a world that spat on both. Isolde could not breathe. So she cursed him, Bryn said. She cursed his whole line. Every king of Izmir down through the centuries would slowly lose the ability to feel because he had felt nothing when he threw her away. She made his cold their inheritance, and she built a single door into the curse, one way out. She swore it into the working with her own blood. Bryn's voice dropped to almost nothing. The curse could only be broken when a king of Izmir truly loved a woman of her bloodline. When a Izmir king loved a Vraimont witch, freely knowing what she was, and chose her anyway. The chamber tilted around Isolde. Because it all fit. Every piece of it. Her whole curse tolerated impossible life snapping suddenly into a shape she could finally see. That's why my wolf woke for her. Corwin breathed from the floor from beneath her hands. His eyes had opened. Barely. Frost still climbing his throat. 300 years. And the goddess had been waiting for her. For a Vraimont to be born who could love a Thal, and a Thal who could love her back. A terrible broken almost laugh. The curse and the cure, same blood. It was always going to be the same blood. My mother, Isolde said. Her voice was shaking. What does this have to do with my mother? Bryn's face crumpled. She found the records, she said. Melis, your mother. She was clever, she went looking through the old accounts and she found the truth. That her own daughter carried the key to breaking the Izmir curse. That you weren't an abomination. That you were the most important child born in 300 years. Bryn's eyes filled. She was going to use it, my lady. She was going to go to the crown, tell them what you were, trade the truth for your protection, so that you'd never spend a day of your life the way you spent all of them, unwanted, unsafe. But she never got the chance, Isolde whispered. She went to someone first, Bryn said. Someone she trusted, someone powerful enough to shield her. She thought he'd help her. And a cold voice, silk over steel, said from across the chamber, she thought wrong. Isolde turned. Lord Castellan stood at the head of the council table, and he was not smiling now. He was watching her the way you watch a fire you thought you'd put out, seeing it lick back to life among the ashes. You, Isolde said. Me, Castellan agreed. And then it all came out of him. Not because he was forced, because he wanted to. Because there is a particular kind of man who has kept a secret so long and so well, that the secret itself becomes a hunger, and the only thing that will feed it is finally saying it out loud to the one person it will hurt the most. My family has guided the throne of Izmir for 300 years, Castellan said. He came around the table unhurried. Do you understand what that means, 300 years? Since the very first king froze. Because a cold king cannot rule. A cold king cannot feel, cannot want, cannot love. And a king who cannot want anything can be given wants. By the right advisor. Whispering in the right ear. He spread his hands almost fond. We made king's girl, my grandfather's grandfather and his before him. The Thals sat on the throne and wore the crown, and the Castellans ruled from 6 inches behind it, and the kingdom never knew the difference because a frozen king asks no questions, and a frozen king signs whatever is put in front of him. His eyes went flat. It was the finest arrangement in the history of our kind, and it depended on one thing above all others. The curse must never break. My mother, Isolde said. Your mother, Castellan said, walked into my study 18 years ago and told me she'd found a way to break it. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. She was so proud, he said softly. So certain I'd want to help. A loyal advisor to the crown, of course he'd want the king freed of his terrible curse. She showed me the records. She told me about her daughter. And I sat there and I smiled and I thought, this woman is going to destroy everything my family has built. This woman and her half-blood child are going to give the throne back its warmth and its will, and I will be nothing. A servant. An ordinary man whispering to a king who no longer needs to listen. So you had her killed, Isolde said. I had her silenced. Castellan's voice didn't change. That was the horror of it. It didn't change at all. I took her records. I burned them. And I gave certain testimony to certain wolves in Duskfen who already wanted a witch to burn. I told them she'd betrayed the pack, murdered a lord, whatever fit. They were so eager to believe it. People always are about a witch. He looked at Isolde with something almost like regret, and the almost made it worse. And I made certain her daughter grew up exactly where she was despised, watched half-starved, believing herself worthless. Because a girl who believes she is nothing will never go looking for what she is. You were the safest you could possibly be, my dear, so long as you hated yourself. It was almost a kindness. A kindness, Isolde breathed. And it worked, Castellan said. For 18 years it worked. And when the time came to be sure of you, to be certain you would never rise, I reached into Duskfen, and I closed the last door. His eyes flicked cold and deliberate to the pale young man standing frozen beside Mordecai. The boy you were promised to, Aldous. I sent word to his father. I made it very clear what would happen to Beta Corin's family if the boy went through with the match. So the boy did as he was told. He stood up in front of 300 wolves and threw you away, because a frightened child does what he's ordered to do, and I have spent my whole life ordering frightened people. And Isolde looked at Aldous, and Aldous looked at the floor. His jaw tightened. Until you stood up at your own rejection and refused to weep, Castellan went on. until the one king in 3 centuries who might feel something happen to be standing in that hall to feel it. 18 years of careful work, and it all came apart because a half-blood girl was too proud to beg. His voice finally cracked just slightly. I should have had you killed on the road. I told myself you'd fail. I told myself no Thal could love curse or no curse that the boy on the throne was too far gone. He looked at Corwin frozen and fading on the floor. I was wrong, and now here we are. Through the bond, Isolde felt Corwin's life flickering, felt it thinning, felt the cold closing in. He'll be dead in minutes, Castellan said almost gently. And you'll follow soon after. A broken bond kills both halves. I've read the accounts. It won't be pleasant, but it will be quick, and then everything goes back to the way it was. And Ysmir freezes over again, and my family goes on ruling the ice for another 300 years. He smiled at last. You were never going to win, child. You were a crack in 3 centuries of stone. Cracks get sealed. And something happened inside Isolde then. Not fear. She had expected fear. She waited for it, and it did not come. Rage. Pure, incandescent 18-year rage. Rage for the mother who died trying to save her. Rage for the childhood spent believing she was garbage. Rage for the stones and the spit and the word abomination, and rage most of all for the man dying at her feet because he'd committed the crime of loving her. The fire erupted. Golden flame burst from her skin, from her arms, her shoulders, her hair, a corona of it filling the chamber with light and heat that hadn't been felt in these black stone walls in 300 years. Castellan threw up an arm and stumbled back with a cry as the heat scorched him. Isolde rose. She rose wreathed in fire, her eyes blazing amber, and when she spoke, her voice had something in it that was not entirely her own. Something older. Something that had waited 3 centuries for this exact moment. My mother was innocent. The flames climbed higher. My blood carries the key to breaking a curse your family has fed on for 300 years, and you murdered her for it. You stole my childhood for it, and you almost took him. You're supposed to be bound, Castellan gasped, scrambling backward, his fine robe smoking. The child was bound, your power was hidden, you can't. My mother hid it, Isolde said. So deep even I couldn't find it. So deep it kept me alive when you wanted me dead. And do you know what finally broke the binding? She advanced and fire trailed from her feet across the stone, and Castellan pressed himself against the wall. Love. The one thing your family made sure a Thal king could never feel. The one thing you spent 300 years freezing out of this kingdom. It was always going to be the thing that undid you. Guards! Castellan shrieked. Seize her! She's a witch! She's guards! No one moved, because the guards were looking at the woman made of light, and the king dying at her feet, and the advisor cowering against the wall in his smoking robes. And something in that room had shifted 300 years of it all at once. They had lived in the cold their whole lives, and here finally was the fire. And a person will always in the end choose the fire over the cold. And then a voice spoke up, small, shaking, but it spoke. He's telling the truth. It was Aldous. He had stepped forward away from Mordecai, and he was white to the lips, and his hands were trembling at his sides, but he was looking at Isolde now, straight at her for the first time in 18 years. I'll say it in front of the whole council, Aldous said. In front of anyone. He threatened my family. He made me reject you. I knew you weren't what they said. I've always known it, and I did it anyway because I was a coward and I was afraid. His voice broke. I can't undo it. I know I can't undo it. But I won't stand here and let him bury it again, whatever it costs me. I'm done being his frightened boy. And Isolde looked at him. At this trembling, ruined young man who had thrown her away and had at the very last found the one thing he'd never had before, the courage to tell the truth in a room that didn't want to hear it. She didn't forgive him. Not in that moment. Forgiveness is not a thing you owe on demand, and it does not arrive on schedule, but she nodded at him, once, and she saw something in his ruined face ease just slightly, as though a stone he'd carried for 18 years had shifted at last an inch. Then she turned back to Castellan. She raised her burning hand. Castellan whimpered, and she could have done it. In that moment, she could have burned him down to ash and shadow, and no one in that chamber would have lifted a finger to stop her, and it would have been justice, and it would have felt like the truest thing she'd ever done. Isolde, a rasp, from the floor. Don't. She looked down. Corwin's eyes were open, barely. The frost had reached his cheekbones. He had minutes, if that, and he was using them, using the last of his failing breath on this. Don't kill him for me, he whispered. Don't become that for me. Not with that on your soul. A shudder. He's not worth what it would cost you. He deserves to die, she said, and her voice broke. Corwin, he deserves it. Yes, Corwin breathed. But not by your hand. Not with that stain. The ghost of something in his gray eyes. Let him rot in the dark instead. Let him live long enough to watch everything he built fall down around him. That's worse. Trust me. I've been cold a long time. There's nothing worse than watching and being able to do nothing at all. The fire wavered. And Isolde looked at Castellan, this small, smoking, whimpering man who had cost her a mother, a childhood, a life, and she understood in that moment exactly what he had wanted her to become. He had shaped her whole existence to teach her one lesson: that she was a monster, witch spawn, an abomination, a thing that burned. And if she killed him now, she would prove him right. She lowered her hand. The fire pulled back into her skin. Take him, she said to the guards, and her voice was steady now and cold in a way that was entirely her own. The deepest cell you have. And if he ever escapes it, if he so much as sees daylight again, I will burn this kingdom to its foundations looking for him. And I will find him. Tell him that. Every day. Tell him I said that. They believed her. They took him. And then she was on her knees again beside Corwin, her hands on his frozen face, the whole world narrowing back down to him. How do I save you, she said. Bryn said there's a way. There has to be a way. Tell me how. You already are, he breathed, and he almost smiled. You've been saving me since the first night. Every time you touched me. His eyes found hers. Kiss me, Isolde. Break it. You're the door. You were always the door. Walk me through it. She pressed her lips to his, and she gave him everything. She did not hold anything back. That was the thing about the fire she understood. In the instant her lips met his cold ones, it only worked if you gave it all. She poured the whole of it into him, every ember, every year of buried power, the fire her mother had hidden, and her ancestor had left burning 300 years ago in the dark heart of a curse. She poured it through the kiss, through the bond, into the frozen ruin of a king's failing heart. The curse recoiled. She felt it. An actual thing, ancient and vast, rearing back from the heat. 300 years of grief and vengeance meeting 300 years of patient waiting love. And in the meeting of them, something opened a door between now and then, and she felt impossibly another presence reach across it. A woman. Ancient, weary, her own blood 3 centuries removed. Break it, the voice whispered, and it was not unkind. It was tired, so tired, the voice of someone who had been carrying a grudge for 300 years and had finally grown too weary to carry it another step. End what I began in grief. I cursed him because he could not love me. Free them because they can. Let it mean something. Let my heartbreak have built a door instead of only a wall. And Isolde understood then the last secret of the curse, that it had never really wanted to win. That Ravenna Vraimont, 300 years dead, had built her vengeance around a single desperate hope, that someday somewhere her own blood would find the love that had been stolen from her. That the curse was a wound, yes, but it was also a prayer. A woman's broken heart calling down the centuries asking only this: let someone someday be loved the way I wasn't. Isolde pushed harder. She gave the last of it. And the ice shattered. It exploded outward from Corwin's chest, not violently, not cruelly, but like a held breath, finally released a shower of crystals bursting into the air and vanishing before they touched the ground, dissolving into nothing, into steam, into the past. 300 years of winter coming apart all at once. Color flooded back into Corwin's face, warmth into his skin, and through the bond she felt it, his warmth, his own warmth returning after 12 years of ice rushing back into him like a tide coming home. He gasped, his whole body arched, and his eyes, when they opened, were not the pale gray of ice over deep water anymore. They were the warm gray of a winter sky when the sun finally breaks through. "It's gone," he breathed. He pressed a hand to his own chest, wonder breaking across his face like dawn. "The cold, Isolde, I can feel everything," his voice cracked. "I'd forgotten. Goddess help me, I'd forgotten what warm even felt like." And then he was reaching for her, pulling her down against him, and his arms came around her, and they were warm, actually truly gloriously warm, a living man holding a living woman on the floor of a chamber that had known nothing but cold for 300 years. "You saved me," he said into her hair. "My mate, my fire, you saved me." And Isolde, who had spent 18 years being nobody's priority, who had been collected like a debt and rejected like a stain, and told her whole life that her blood was a curse. Isolde put her face against the warm neck of the king who loved her, and finally, for the first time she could remember, she let herself cry. Not because she was breaking, because she was at long last safe enough to. There is a price to power like that. There is always a price. She understood it in the days that followed as she waited for the fire to return, and it did not come. She'd given all of it, every ember. She hadn't known in that moment on the chamber floor that giving all of it meant giving it forever, that the fire her mother had hidden and her ancestor had left burning was a thing you could spend only once, all at once, and never call back. The witch blood was quiet now. The palm that had held a golden flame held nothing. When she reached for the warmth inside her, the way she'd reached for the dead garden, there was only the ordinary warmth of an ordinary woman. She was for the first time in her life simply herself. No fire, no key, no prophecy, just Isolde. And she waited to feel the loss of it. She braced for it. Because the fire had been the thing that made her matter, hadn't it? The fire had freed a kingdom. The fire had made a nobody into the woman who broke a 300-year curse. Without it, what was she? She said as much to Corwin one evening in the garden that never froze anymore. "I'm not anything now," she said. "The power's gone. I gave it all to you, and I keep waiting to feel like it was worth it. And instead I just feel," she searched for it, "empty. Like I traded away the only thing that made me worth keeping." And Corwin stopped walking. He turned to her and he took her ordinary fireless hands in his warm ones, and he looked at her with a fierceness that startled her. "Listen to me," he said. "The night I saw you in Duskfen, the night my wolf woke up after 12 years, you had no fire. It hadn't woken yet. You didn't do a single magical thing." His hands tightened on hers. "You stood in a room full of people who hated you, and you refused to give them your tears. That's what woke my wolf. Not the fire. You. Your spine. The thing in you that would not break no matter how hard they tried to break it." She stared at him. "The fire was never what made you worth keeping," he said. "The fire was just the last thing about you that the world could finally see. Everything that mattered. Everything I fell in love with you had before you ever burned. And you still have it. You'll always have it. They can't take it and you can't give it away because it was never in your blood at all." His voice softened. "It was in you." And something that had been clenched in Isolde's chest for 18 years, some fist she hadn't even known was closed, finally quietly opened. Because he was right. The fire had come and the fire had gone, and she was still here, still herself, still the woman who wouldn't beg. That woman had existed long before the magic woke, and she'd go on existing long after it was spent. And no one, not her uncle, not Castellan, not a court full of sneering wolves, not even Isolde herself, had ever been able to put her out. She had spent her whole life believing her blood was a curse. And it turned out the truest thing about her had never been in her blood at all. 3 months later, Weismere gathered for a wedding. And the kingdom that assembled was not the kingdom Isolde had first ridden into on a cold 3-day road. The black stone was the same, the silver filigree. But the cold was gone, truly gone, and green things grew now in courtyards that had been frozen for centuries, and children ran through halls that had within living memory held nothing but their breath. Isolde stood at the altar in a gown of crimson and gold flames embroidered along the hem, not because she could make fire anymore, but because she had chosen the fire as her own, the way you claim a name that was once used against you and wear it like a crown. Her dark hair was crowned with the first flowers Ismir had grown in 300 years, cut from the garden she had thawed with a single sorry touch. And Corwin waited for her, in colors no one had ever seen him wear. Deep blue and silver instead of the endless black matching, the new banners of Ismir that hung throughout the hall, banners that bore now a golden flame beside the ancient wolf. "I love you," he said as she reached him. He said it easily now. He said it like a man who'd spent 12 years unable to and intended to make up for every one of them. "I will love you until the stars burn out, and past that, whatever comes after that." "I love you too," she said. "Since the moment you looked at me and saw someone worth claiming." And when they kissed to seal it, there was no fire and no magic and no breaking of curses. There was only warmth. The ordinary, miraculous warmth of two living people who had each spent a lifetime being cold, finally at last coming in from it together. At the feast, Bryn brought her a letter. "This came from Duskfen, Your Majesty." Your Majesty. Isolde still wasn't used to it. She wondered if she ever would be. The letter was from Vespera, her cousin, the girl who had once led the other children in throwing stones because leading them made the adults smile. "I was wrong," the letter read. "About everything. Father has been arrested. They've charged him with conspiracy in your mother's execution, with helping to spread the lies. Castellan fed the pack all those years." Aldous testified. He stood in front of the whole council and told them what was done to you and what was done to him to make him do it, and it broke the whole thing open. "Your mother's name has been cleared. It's carved back into the pack records where they'd scratched it out. I don't expect your forgiveness, and I won't insult you by asking for it. But I wanted you to know. And I am ashamed, more ashamed than I know how to say, that it took me this long to see the truth of who you were. And who I was to treat you the way I did." Isolde read it 3 times. "It's over," she whispered. "All of it. Finally." Corwin pressed a kiss to her temple. "No," he said. "It's not over." He turned her gently to face the hall, the warm green living hall full of people dancing in a castle that had forgotten how. "This isn't the end of anything, Isolde. This is the first day of everything they tried to take from you." His warm gray eyes held hers. "It's just beginning." And he was right. Because the witch blood that had been called a curse had turned out to be a key. And the half-blood nobody that a whole pack had thrown away had turned out to be the woman who saved a kingdom. And the king who could not love had turned out to be a man whose love, once it thawed, warmed everyone who came near him for the rest of his long and finally feeling life. But that was never really the lesson. Isolde knew that now. The lesson was smaller and truer, and it had been there from the very first night in a great cold hall full of people who wanted her to break. That the worth of a person is not in their blood, not in where they were born or who agreed to claim them or whether the world decided they mattered. It is not even in their power because the fire comes and the fire goes. It is in the choice to stand straight when they want you kneeling, the choice to answer a lifetime of cruelty, not with more of it, but with mercy, to let a curse become a door and a wound become a prayer and a lifetime of being unwanted. Become at last the very thing that lets you understand exactly how much everyone deserves to be loved. And somewhere beyond the veil between worlds, 2 women watched. Malis Fremont, who had died protecting a secret and a daughter. And beside her 3 centuries older, a witch with tired eyes, who had once cursed a king for the crime of not loving her. They watched Isolde dance with Corwin in a hall gone gold with warmth. They watched the frost stay gone from the windows. They watched a kingdom and a girl and a curse all finally come home. "She did it," Ravenna whispered. And there were tears on her ancient spectral face, but they were not the tears of grief. Not anymore. She chose love over vengeance. She let it become a door. A long breath 300 years held and finally released. "Just as I should have. All those years ago. Just as I should have." "Yes," said Malis softly, watching her daughter laugh in the arms of a man who would never let her be cold again. "But she learned it. And that's the thing about the ones we leave behind, isn't it? They get to learn what we couldn't. That's what they're for. They'll be happy, Ravenna said. They will, said Malus. They already are, and they were.